Henry Caldwell lay on the cold, sterile bed, staring up at the ceiling. The dim light above him flickered faintly, casting shifting shadows that seemed to dance around the edges of the room. His chest rose and fell with slow, labored breaths, each one more difficult than the last. The beeping of the heart monitor next to him was a constant reminder that his time was nearly up. He knew it. The doctors had told him as much, but he didn't need them to. His body was failing, his strength was gone, and the weight of death was pressing down on him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. But something else was there too, something unseen, lurking just beyond the edges of his fading consciousness. It had been with him for days now, an oppressive presence that clung to him like a shadow, growing stronger with every breath he struggled to take. He could feel it watching him, waiting, but it wasn't death itself. No, this was something darker, something far more sinister. He blinked slowly, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beep of the machines and the occasional shuffle of footsteps outside the door. He was alone, as he had been for days. The nurses came and went, their faces a blur of indifference, and the doctors spoke to him in voices that barely registered. His family had visited once, but they had left when it became clear that there was nothing more to say. He was dying, and they had made their peace with it. But Henry hadn't. Not yet. A deep, rattling breath escaped his lips, and for a moment, the world seemed to blur around him. His vision wavered, the room darkening at the edges. He blinked again, forcing his eyes to focus, and that's when he saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light. At first, he thought it was one of the nurses, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized it was something else entirely. The figure was tall, its form indistinct and shrouded in shadows. Its face was hidden, obscured by the darkness that seemed to cling to it like a living thing. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but Henry could feel its gaze on him, cold, unfeeling, and utterly inhuman. He tried to speak, to call out, but his voice was little more than a dry whisper. His throat burned, and the effort sent a wave of pain through his chest. The figure remained still, watching him with those unseen eyes, and as Henry's heart pounded in his chest, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him. He had always known that death would come for him one day, but he hadn't expected this. This was something far worse. It was as if the air in the room had grown thick and heavy, pressing down on him from all sides. His skin crawled with the sensation of being watched, not just by the figure in the corner, but by something far greater, something vast and unknowable. A shiver ran down his spine, despite the warmth of the room. His breaths came faster now, shallow and panicked, as if his body was trying to escape the inevitable. The beeping of the heart monitor quickened, echoing in his ears like a countdown. The figure moved then, just a fraction, but enough to send a bolt of fear through Henry's body. It stepped closer, the shadows around it shifting and swirling like smoke. He could see more of it now, a vague, humanoid shape, but twisted and wrong, its limbs too long, its movements unnaturally smooth. Henry's heart raced, his body trembling with fear. He wanted to scream, to beg for help, but his voice was trapped in his throat, strangled by the terror that gripped him. The figure took another step, and then another, until it was standing at the foot of his bed. For a long, agonizing moment, it simply stood there, silent and still. Henry could feel the weight of its presence, could sense the coldness radiating from it like a physical force. It was death, he realized, not the quiet, peaceful end he had once imagined, but something darker, something that had been stalking him, waiting for this moment. The figure leaned forward, its face still hidden in shadow, and Henry could feel its breath, cold and damp, on his skin. His heart pounded in his chest, his pulse thundering in his ears. He was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to speak. And then, the figure whispered, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves in the wind. "You are mine." The word sent a jolt of terror through Henry's body, and for the first time in days, he felt truly alive, alive with fear, alive with the desperate need to escape. His body tensed, his muscles screaming in protest as he tried to move, but it was no use. The weight of the figure's presence pressed down on him, pinning him to the bed. His breath came in short, frantic gasps now, each one a struggle, each one more painful than the last. The beeping of the heart monitor was erratic, a chaotic symphony of sound that filled the room. Henry's vision blurred, the edges of the world growing darker, but the figure remained, its cold breath washing over him. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice echoing in his mind, filling him with despair. "You have always been mine." The darkness closed in, suffocating him, crushing him beneath its weight. He could feel his body shutting down, his heart stuttering in his chest. The world around him faded, the beeping of the monitor growing distant, muffled, as if he were sinking into a deep, dark ocean. And then, in the midst of the suffocating darkness, he felt something else, a warmth, faint at first, but growing stronger. It spread through his chest, chasing away the cold, the fear, the despair. It was hope, small and fragile, but there nonetheless. Henry's breath slowed, steadied. The figure at the foot of the bed recoiled, its shadowy form flickering as if it were being pulled away, dragged back into the void from which it had come. It hissed, a sound of anger and frustration, but it could not hold on. The warmth, the light, was too strong. And then, with one final, rattling breath, Henry let go. The darkness vanished, replaced by a blinding light that filled every corner of his being. The pain, the fear, the terror, it was all gone. He was weightless, free, floating in the light, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt at peace. The figure was gone, banished to whatever dark corner of the universe it had come from. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the machines and the steady beep of the heart monitor. But Henry was no longer there. His body lay still on the bed, his chest no longer rising and falling, his eyes closed in peaceful repose. The final breath had been taken. Outside the room, the nurses went about their rounds, unaware of the struggle that had taken place within. To them, it was just another death, another patient who had reached the end of the line. But to Henry, it had been so much more. He had faced the darkness, the fear, the terror that comes with the end of life, and in the end, he had found peace. Not because he had escaped death, but because he had accepted it. And in that final moment, as his soul slipped free of his earthly body, he realized that death was not an end, but a beginning. The light welcomed him, warm and comforting, and Henry Caldwell, for the first time in his life, was truly free.